Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just exit this and try one more time. Make sure it comes up in full screen. There we go. Technology is wonderful when it works, and when it doesn't work, you panic. It's good to be with you today. The title of my talk is Babel to Babel, Asserting Oneness. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction as to who I am and the work that we do. I grew up and still live in rural Manitoba. I grew up on a grain farm, and I live in the Gladstone-Neepawa area. If you know Manitoba at all, at least that part, we're more specifically in the village of Plumas. I am married to a wonderful lady originally from Verdun, Manitoba, Leanne Forsyth. We have two children. One is 20 and one is 17. And I've been engaged in researching what we would consider global transformation since at least 1992. And from 1997 to 2001, I was the research director for Gary Kaw's ministry in Indiana. And my material is used by a lot of other authors, radio hosts, and commentators. And since 2007, we started our Forcing Change magazine, and that is something we've been doing now full time. Forcing Change. Some people say, well, where did that name come from? The concept behind the name is this. It is my job, my task, to help you understand the forces of change. Because change is happening. And it's not simply an accident. This is the moment and movement of history that is culminating in a society that is rapidly transforming itself. And so I edit a monthly magazine called Forcing Change. You can download it off of our website. I'll give you the address in a few minutes. I write essays, chapters of various books, and a lot of specialized reports, do different radio talk show hosts or radio talk shows and speak at different conferences. And one thing that we do that's a little bit different in our research is we try and go to some of the events we talk about to better understand what these changes look like. So over the years, I've literally embedded myself at United Nations events, World Federalist events, interfaith, occult, New Age events, and in other various forums. And we'll talk a little bit about that this morning. You'll get some of the information in this presentation. You will feel like that by the time this hour is done. Truly, welcome to my world. That is what this task feels like. It is heavy. And so giving you a little bit of lightness up front helps because the rest of it is not light at all as we consider the forces of change. My first taste of this from an experiential perspective happened on April the 4th to the 6th, 1997. I went to the Global Citizenship 2000 Youth Congress, set up 1,000 days before the year 2000. Robert Mueller, a high-ranking former official at the United Nations, came to talk to us. And he spoke to school children, educators, BC administrators, because this was all taking place in Vancouver, on how to embed a onist philosophy into Canada's education system. And so over the course of those days, we talked a lot about changing and molding the values and the belief system of our culture through education. The audience included school children. It included teachers. It included educators and administrators. So this is some of the language that we were told. You are the earth becoming conscious of herself. Unite global citizens to save and heal planet Earth. Robert Mueller told us, myself, I was in the audience, you are not children of Canada. You are really living units of the cosmos because the earth is a cosmic phenomena. We are all cosmic units. This is why religions tell you, you are divine. We are divine energy. It is in our hands whether evolution on this planet continues or not. This evening I'll be talking about the role of the environmental movement, and we'll hear a little bit more about what Robert Mueller told us at this conference. Remember the audience, young people. What is oneness? What is this idea of one-ism? Simply this, all is divine. You are divine. Nature is divine. God and you are inseparable. We're all part of the cosmic consciousness. This is what Robert Mueller says in his book, New Genesis. Humankind is seeking no less than its reunion with the divine, its transcendence into ever higher forms of life. Hindus call our earth Brahma, or God, for they rightly see no difference between our earth and the divine. This ancient simple truth is slowly dawning upon humanity. Its full flowering will be the real, great, new story of humanity, as we are about to enter our cosmic age and to become what we were always meant to be, the planet of God. Pretty wild. What is oneness? It's simply this: all is contained in one, all is one. This is the dominant worldview, by the way. Eastern religions adhere to this worldview, the concept that humanity, nature, and God are all one. They are inseparable. Classic and neo-paganism speaks the same language. Nature is the embodiment of the divine. Humanity and nature, we're one. We're all connected. It's the world of magic and the occult, where human energy and ritual seeks to connect to the divine. We seek to act upon the all. And cosmic humanism and the New Age movement proclaims in essence that we are God. The New Age says you are God. Cosmic humanism takes it one step further and says collectively we are God. And then secular humanism is a oneness perspective as well. For in secular humanism, it claims that humanity is only a part of nature, that we are autonomous. We can direct evolution. There is no God separate and outside of creation. We are God. That's all there is. So this is the dominant worldview. There are some Christian authors over the last couple of decades who've been wrestling through what this looks like. Doug Grotius, in his book Unmasking the New Age, back in 1986, described this as a total movement. This is a holistic, total package. The whole society must be brought into harmony with the one as the new consciousness produces the new age. Philip Baum, who I had the opportunity of meeting back in the mid-1990s, calls this a spiritual political ecumenicism, because there are implications beyond the spiritual. This plays out into all areas of society. Oswald says there are only two worldviews, the Bible one and the other one. And Peter Jones, I appreciate how he wrestled with this. He views this in terms of a spiritual ideology, that in oneness, everything shares the same essence. In essence, we're all part of the divine. And he's taken it one step further, and he's described this as one-ism or two-ism. Which is it that you follow? There are only two paths. In one-ism, nature, humanity, and God are all one. In two-ism, God exists outside of creation. God is separate from creation. And you're not God. There are only two, God and everything else. That is the biblical reality. And if you want to see some great examples of this, you need to look at Isaiah 44 and also Isaiah 40. Isaiah 40 is phenomenal. God compares himself to the nations of the world and says, you're nothing compared to me. You count less even as a drop in a bucket. He compares himself to us and goes, you're grass that just withers. Who counsels God? No man. Read Isaiah 40 with a oneness perspective versus a two-ist perspective, and you realize, oh, here's a God who commands authority outside of creation. He stands apart, exalted, holy. That's the meaning of holy. That's the meaning of exalted. He's not part of the created order. We cannot manipulate him as if he's just nature. So this is the clash that's going on between one or two. And there's a problem with two-ism. It's a cultural, social, spiritual problem. And this is why the world hates you. Because two-ism demands that there is separation, that there is what we would call biblical exclusivity. And in our world of oneness, the dominant worldview, that's taboo. It is absolutely taboo to have an exclusive truth claim, or to claim that Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. That's separating. That's excluding. In a oneness worldview, it's all about inclusivity. We're all doing this together. Higher standards and the idea of a final judgment is absolutely repulsive in the oneness worldview. And then here's where the rubber hits the road. In the cultural, social sphere, one-ism demands that the byproducts of two-ism, which traditionally are things like family, even sexual values and sexual views, those two-ist views are deemed archaic and, in fact, step on your road to inclusivity. And if you want to see where this really hit in a major way, look to Indiana 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was in Indiana, and I watched this play as the battle between the Religious Freedom Act and the same-sex lobby group ramped right up. In fact, I have friends who helped write the act, and the day before Mike Pence signed that act, I sat down with one of my friends who helped write some of the wording for the bill. And he says, "Carl, I'm getting death threats. My family is being maligned." He says, "I've never had this kind of intense pressure. We're really afraid of where our society and where our culture is going, because it is ugly. It's not even we're agreeing to disagree. No, it is you assimilate in the oneness worldview, or we crush you." That was the feeling that came out of that experience. You see, the oneness worldview demands a holistic, total submission to their goal, to their idea. Anything else says that we have a higher standard that we look to, and that is God. So today we're going to take a look just briefly in 4 areas. I'm going to give you just a snippet of presentations that I give that are each about an hour long. And so what you're getting is a bit of a smorgasbord on how one-ism plays itself out in the culture and in society. We'll be looking at the human landscape, politics, religion, and technology. Later on this evening, we'll be looking at the environment. And then tomorrow, don't miss it, we're looking at something called evolutionary culture and transformational festivals. So, what does this look like? Well, turn over to Genesis chapter 11 because we see a very vivid example of how this practically plays out, even in architecture. Genesis chapter 11, we'll be reading verses 1 to verse 9. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had bricks for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad. Scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Here we see the first example of our unity in collective power. We are coming together to build something. This is how it breaks down. The world has one language. They are united in this language. The decision is this: we build not just simply a tower, that's what we end up focusing on, but it's really a tower city complex. And by the way, this is not the first city in the Bible. Can anybody here name me the first city in the Bible? Anybody? Genesis chapter 4. The city's called Enoch. Cain builds it in response to God casting judgment on him, saying, "Cain, you are now forced to wander." And Cain, woe is me, if I go wandering, I am going to die. Somebody's going to kill me. I'm just paraphrasing, obviously. And God says, "No, I'm going to give you a mark on your head. You wander." What does Cain do? He stops and he builds a city. And the idea behind this is, it is my place of security. This is my place where I establish myself. I do it my own way. Take a look through Genesis chapter 4. Reread that sometime. Consider what is taking place. Anyways, here we have the Tower of Babel. It is both a city and a tower complex. The idea, the purpose here, we're going to make a name for ourselves, is this concept of renown and fame, lest we be scattered. And in verse 6, the word begin is shalal. And the idea is that this is an act of profiling. This is defiling, this is profaning. And then verse 6, we see that nothing is impossible if they continue on this vein. And the idea behind this is that they are fortifying, that this is a power grab. God comes down, he imposes judgment, the project stops. There's a lot going on here, including the idea that we are self-naming, that we are defining our purpose as humanity. We are declaring our independence from God. We are pursuing our own order. We are framing our own security. We are putting our faith in the works of our own hands, which is the essence of idolatry. Let's take a look then at the architecture of unity, the human landscape. This idea of let's build a city is something that, yes, goes back to Genesis, but even today and in our modern culture and context has some similarities, some carryover. In 1913, an international world capital was suggested. There was a large document, it had blueprints, it went out all around the world. And the suggestion was the globe needs to come together and rally around literally an international city. The architect, Heinrich Andersen, described it this way. The tower, which will form the chief feature of both center and city, was conceived as symbolic of our faith in unity. In the center of the city was to be literally a tower to human progress. And it was going to be over 1,000 feet high. And around this tower would be international congresses of justice and science. There would be a World Bank, a temple of religions. This was his idea in 1913. This is what he writes. And there's a picture of the city, an artist's drawing, or his drawing. A change is now felt throughout the entire world. A divine responsibility governs our actions. As we are one with the past, so we must be one with the future. Man's strength can only come through world unification, peace and fellowship, a grandeur coalescence, a world centralization. Well, what happened the next year? World War I, right. So much for your grand visions of peace and coming together in unity, right? But it reflects mankind's heart. And then in the 1930s, the Soviet Union wanted to do something very similar. And they looked at constructing what they called the Palace of the Soviets, which was going to be just offside from the Kremlin. The Palace of the Soviets would have been the largest structure of its time if it had been built. And at the top of this massive edifice was going to be a statue of Lenin, uniting all the workers of the world together under the loving arms of global communism. They started this project in 1931 by imploding the Christ of the Cathedral Church, flattening it so they could begin the construction of this monumental project. Materials were brought in, a lot of steel, a lot of materials were brought to the site. The foundations were laid. It took time, however, and by the time 1939 rolls around, all you have is a foundation there and this mountain of material, and World War II starts as both Germany and Russia invade Poland at the same time. And then, of course, when Germany goes to war against the Soviet Union, at this point, this project is on the back burners. The irony of it is, Germany ends up using that massive pile of materials as a bombing target for Moscow and blows it to oblivion. But what was this? This spoke to the heart of man. Look what we can build, a monument to ourselves. This same kind of feature is found if you take a look at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, which is built around the famous painting of the Tower of Babel, or the European Community poster from a number of years ago that says, Europe, many tongues, one voice, built around the Tower of Babel concept. Again, we're going back to something very old, something very basic. And then a little bit closer to home, my province, Manitoba, and our Human Rights Museum. This is what Architect Week said in August 2011. The Museum for Human Rights finds its archetype in the biblical Tower of Babel, described in the book of Genesis. And if you go through it, you go to the very tip top and you end up at this tower of enlightenment, this tower of illumination, where you now are completely connected to the atrocities of the past, and you see the glorious future unfold as mankind comes together to work for human rights. This is what the museum architect himself said, that this museum is rooted in humanity, making visible in the architecture the fundamental commonality of humankind. It's the creation of a unifying and timeless landmark for all nations and cultures of the world. You bet it is. You bet. This goes back a long, long ways. We just read it out of Genesis. It reminds me what Warren Wagner said in his book, Building the City of Man, in the 1960s. The dream of an integrated world order is one of the oldest rational visions of civilized man. In a sense, it created civilization. We will build our own security. It is the works of our own hands. Let's take a look and see how this plays out in terms of politics. Because if oneness is a dominant force in the world, well, then it'll even show in areas like politics. Back in World War I, Nicholas Murray Butler, who at that point was Mr. International, he was the president of Columbia University, writes this as he sees Europe in flames. The time will come when each nation will deposit in a world federation some portion of its sovereignty for the general good. When this happens, it will be possible to establish an international executive and an international police, both devised for the special purpose of enforcing the decisions of the International Court. He is calling for world government. World War II saw something very similar. During World War II, there's a tremendous outcry for world government and world federalism. And not just in the secular sense. Churches were on board in a significant way. In fact, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Northern Baptist Convention, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, all of them were engaged in some way, shape, and form with the idea of world federalism. 4 weeks ago, I was in Indiana. 3 weeks ago, when all the stuff was going on, we were there for an extended period of time, but 4 weeks ago, my wife and I went to a university in Indiana that contains the largest world government archives in North America. And we spent a day pursuing and perusing through these archives. There was over 325 boxes. We got through 5 boxes in one day of just pouring through the materials. And they were letters, documents, membership lists. What was amazing was how many letters we found from church denominations saying, we're all for this. And not just simply saying, we advocate for you and we support this idea, but we're sending delegates to your meetings, and these are his names and these are his credentials. You see, in the 1940s already, the church, just as it was with the social gospel movement earlier than that, looked to itself and said, we can find a way to solve mankind's problems. We're just playing Tower of Babel. That's all we're doing. And so in the 1940s, this idea of world government really came to fruition. It ended up moving forward in a big way. Winston Churchill believed in this. After World War II was done, he traveled across England and in the United States preaching world government. This is what he said in his 1947 speech. The creation of an authoritative, all-powerful world order is the ultimate aim towards which we must strive. Unless some effective world supergovernment can be set up and brought quickly into action, the prospects for peace and human progress are dark and doubtful. It was a big idea. I saw this during the year 2000 when I was embedded with the United Nations Millennium Forum. I attended because at that point in time, I had been rubbing shoulders in the World Federalist community, and through some different actions was able to get myself into that particular event. And so I was part of a working group on reforming and revising the international order. We talked about developing world law, the need for a global parliament. We talked about the concept of creating a United Nations-controlled police force, imposing global taxes to help pay for this. By the way, already, that was the year 2000. 2 years before that, in our House of Commons in Ottawa, Lorne Nystrom, NDP from Qu'Appelle Valley, put in motion that Canada would be the first country to pay a world tax when it comes to fruition. And so we enshrined that in our Canadian law back, I believe it was in 1998 already. Thank you, Saskatchewan. He's from Capel. He's from your neck of the woods, so to speak. I mean, we're talking about serious stuff here, ladies and gentlemen. One of the other areas that we were looking at was the United Nations needed to oversee the world's financial system. And so there's a picture of myself, a much younger looking me, with my United Nations security clearance. It was an eye-opener, let me tell you. One of the documents that was handed out, it wasn't a UN document, but a document from another organization, was this document entitled Transformation of the World. And there's a picture of it. The document suggests what we need is a world king, a global king who can lead us forward out of our mess and unite mankind. Listen to this quote. It's extensive, but think about it. The world does need a civilized coordinator in international relations and in settling global problems. More than that, this coordinator must be a stabilizing factor, actually, the last-ditch authority on the earth. He must win confidence of each man and each nation. People must be stark sure that this coordinator would solve any problem in a just and humane way. And one should be sure that in him we would find understanding and sympathy, that he would treat any nation as his own son. Can the world community do without a coordinator? Definitely not. Whoa! That's pretty blatant. And then in 2012, I had the opportunity of embedding myself with a large world federalist, world government meeting that took place in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Every 5 years or so, the World Federalist, global World Federalist movement gets together in an international city to wrestle through how their agenda looks. By the way, this group was the one that was instrumental in making sure the International Criminal Court passed. If this group didn't exist, the ICC would not exist. And a lot of other areas that they've had their hands in. And so I had embedded myself, along with a young person who was with me as my intern, into that event. Now, we talked about all kinds of things. We talked about creating a democratic world order through a global parliament. We needing to empower the United Nations with the police and with taxes. We talked about the idea of creating an international court for the environment, which last year was now being on the docket to be discussed at the United Nations. And now what we need is to have this whole structure waiting in the wings for the next global crisis. Because as World War I brought about the League of Nations, World War II brought about the United Nations, the next global crisis, true global crisis, will bring about the final installment. And our job is to set this up. That was the thinking. So, here's a list of some of the cities over the last number of decades that these men have met at, men and women. So, why Winnipeg? Are you not at least a little bit curious? Winnipeg is not a world city. I mean, it's my capital of my province, but whip-de-doo. It's not a Tokyo. It's not a London or New York. Why Winnipeg? Pardon me? No. It's because of a man. If you were readers of Forcing Change, you'd all know that answer already. Lloyd Axworthy, at that point, was the president of the University of Winnipeg. Now, Lloyd Axworthy was, if you remember, our foreign affairs minister, and he was the United Nations ambassador to Canada for a time. Lloyd Axworthy is the international president of the World Federalist Movement. If all of a sudden that doesn't go bing, I'm not sure what will. We literally had a man who was our UN ambassador and who held the positions he did, favoring and courting world federalism. So much so that after he was out of office, the World Federalists approached him and said, "We want you on board as our international president." So that's why they came to Winnipeg. Well, how about religions? How does religion play into this? Again, we're just showing you snippets, just snippets. Here's a historical perspective. This goes back to the 1893 Parliament of Religions in Chicago. Listen to the language. Again, it's just building a Tower of Babel. The religion of the future will be universal in every sense. It will embody all the thoughts and aspirations and virtues and emotions of all humanity. It will draw together all lands and peoples and kindreds and tongues into a universal brotherhood of love and service. It will establish upon earth a heavenly order. We will create heaven on earth. I saw this during the year 2000 when I took part as and a researcher in the United Religions Initiative Global Summit signing that took place in Pittsburgh. United Religions Initiative was a global initiative. It still exists today. The idea was that at that point in time, we would create literally a United Nations of religions. And it would work hand in hand with the UN. As we have a political side, we'll now have a religious side. And this entity will help guide global ethics and global religious and spiritual principles. And so I attended this event. And what was remarkable was just the incredible cross-section of various religions, including Christians. Christianity and Christian leaders do play a role, and you're going to see this coming up. I saw something, again, quite similar during the United Nations World Urban Forum in Vancouver in the year 2006. Now, the World Urban Forum was all about how do we build global cities, and how do global cities intersect with the international community. So it's all politics, except for one special event that took place. It was a 3-hour working group on how does religion and global politics fit in terms of the world city. And so for roughly 3 hours, we had a group of about 300 people, all sitting in a great big circle with an inner circle of religious leaders, mayors, and councillors from prominent cities. And after about 3 hours of discussion, it was determined that what cities need to do is start writing bylaws that will exclude out of core zones of their cities, exclude from downtown districts, any temple or church that preaches an exclusivistic truth claim. Take and cut them out of your community because they are all about separateness, and that brings division and conflict. Instead of having exclusive truth claims, what we need is centers for interfaith development and interfaith growth. Now, this didn't become a law. It was just simply a recommendation. But for myself sitting there taking notes and listening and watching it all unfold, it was like I'm watching the future before it hits. Because it's obvious that exclusive truth claims are on the taboo list in a major way. And then one other one that I took part in that I think you might find interesting. And that's the G8 World Religion Summit that took place in 2010, again in Winnipeg, again put in place in large part through Lloyd Axworthy. And here we were told that there's not just simply one way to God, but that there are many, many ways to God. And what was interesting is that this was the religious parallel to the political G8 summit. You all remember the G8 political summits. That year was in Toronto and Southern Ontario. I mean, the cameras were there, news crews were there, there was rioting, Tim Hortons got broke into, a car burns, this kind of stuff. We're all glued to our TV as we were watching the anarchy, and then the police try to bring order. At the same time that there is this political side, there's also a religious G8 meeting that takes place. It's been happening for years, and Winnipeg hosted the 2010. No fanfare, no cars burning, nobody was breaking into Tim Hortons, but world religions came together to take and tackle what it would mean to be religious in a global paradigm, what this new world would look like. So who was there? Who was at this event, this G8 World Religions Summit? The Baha'is, the pagan and indigenous communities, representatives from Judaism, 2 men from Saudi Arabia with flowing robes. It was impressive. Walked in as representatives of the Ministry of Islamic Affairs. The Hindus, the Sikhs, the Tony Blair Foundation had a representative in the World Council of Religions for Peace. That's just some. Take a look at that list. Do you see any that you might recognize? I hate to say it, but the Canadian Council of Churches was one of the ones that was instrumental in putting this together. And the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada was brought in as a strategic partner to ensure that this event had a large evangelical presence, and it did. We, the Christian community in Canada, were the dominant representatives of this particular event. What did we talk about? I say we because I'm there. What did we talk about? Well, the necessity of religious unity for our common good and for world peace, because we have religious wars, right? I do a whole session on that, demonstrating that there's a fallacy behind it and how that gets leveraged. What we need is a global financial governance system. A world tax was talked about. the idea of creating a new socialist economic order. One of the representatives, this was from the Salvation Army, said this: "It's not about having a bike for each. It's about learning to share one bike in community." Lenin would be happy. The concept of eco-justice. What we need is a gospel of respecting nature. One of the quotes was, "We are the biggest parasites on earth." The idea of earth loyalty and a spiritually generated earth ethic was repeated over and over again. And no surprise, somebody needs to manage all of this, so a lot of talk of empowering the United Nations toward that end. We will coexist religiously as we coexist politically. Of course, reality demonstrates otherwise, but we will try this as hard as we can. And then who saw this one last year? 2014 in September in Korea, South Korea. I didn't go. I didn't have the opportunity to go. But one of the largest gatherings of religious leaders took place last September. Over 900 religious leaders converged. The opening ceremonies, you see the picture of it down there, was like the Olympics with 200,000 people in attendance. It was phenomenal. What was the purpose? To sign a declaration to put into world law, and it's just a declaration at this point, that's all it is, to say that all religions must unite under God as one. This is oneness. This is just another Tower of Babel. And then, of course, we have this one coming up. Salt Lake City, this year in October, will host the next installment of the Parliament of World Religions. And everybody thinks of Salt Lake City as this, the center picture, the Mormon temple. But a lot of people don't realize there's other religions in Salt Lake City, including the largest Hare Krishna temple in North America and a very significant sized Islamic mosque. This is Salt Lake City. So if anybody here wants to sponsor a certain somebody to embed themselves into this event, I could drop a name or so. Seriously, somebody does need to go to this event and report back to the Christian community where this is going, especially this year as we've seen such a clash between conservative Christianity and the rest of the culture. And it's only going to play out in more dramatic ways. So yes, somebody does need to go there. All right, we're going to quickly switch gears. I'm going to give you one more snippet of how oneness is coming into play, how we are creating another Babel, and that is through transhumanism. As we took a look at architecture, the idea of the urban environment or landscape, as we took a look at politics and then religion, well, here's something that might be new to a few of you, and that is transhumanism. Let us take and create a technology that brings us together as one. This is very important because it's a play against Genesis in a very significant way. What is transhumanism? Simply this. It's the idea that evolution is true, and therefore, if evolution is true, we should be able, through our technology, through our technical means, to change the shape of evolution. We will, through the works of our hands, perfect ourselves. We will direct evolution through our science and through our industry. And we have incredible technological advancements that are now taking place. And the belief behind this is that transhumanism will take those technological developments and we will play God, and in so doing, we become God. So what are some of the technological developments? Well, nanotechnology, advanced robotics, genetic manipulation, virtual worlds, and we'll talk a little bit about that in, probably tomorrow morning a bit. There's a whole list of incredible advances taking place in technology. And so the movement of transhumanism says, let's take those and create man in our own image. The first transhumanist event I ever went to was in Salt Lake City with the Mormon Transhumanist Association. And some of you might be going, why would the Mormons be interested in this? Because it explains their theology, which is to seek to become as God. And now the view is if we can do this through our technology and our science, we can demonstrate the validity of that claim that we can become as God. After going through the first session, which was entitled Fear and Trembling at the Tower of Babel, describing all the various technologies and the movement of transhumanism, during the Q&A session, one of the other speakers said this, and I thought it was so profound. He said this: we are now at a Tower of Babel return point. Anything we imagine, we can do. There's nothing out of our grasp now. Very telling. Here's another quote from a famous transhumanist, Mark Swaney, from his Singularity article, Is a Spiritual Singularity Near? As our understanding of technology grows, so does our understanding of the spiritual universe. Our conception of God has formed and reformed into the shape of our technology. Not only that, spiritual figures are seen as a master of current and future technology. Profound technological change and profound philosophical change are intermingled. Change is happening. Period. The purpose of forcing change is to help you understand those forces that are changing our society. And this is certainly one of them. I do a whole presentation just on transhumanism because this is a deep and profoundly powerful movement. In 2014, I had the opportunity, 2013, of going to the Global Future 2045 Congress. Why 2045? Well, because the view is by 2045, our technology will have advanced so rapidly that we will be forced to change, even biologically, and become more than human. See, that's what transhumanism is all about. Becoming beyond human. We will become more than what you were created to be. And so we had an incredible array of rock stars from the transhumanist community. Ray Kurzweil, Director of Engineering at Google. He is one of the rock stars, the premier rock star of the transhumanist community. If you use Google, you're using Ray Kurzweil's technology, obviously. And Google is a funder and supporter of the transhumanist movement. And that's one thing that's kind of interesting. Most of the major tech companies are. It's really a fascinating study. So there's about 800 people or so that came to New York City to talk about what the world will look like by 2045 and where the technology is taking us so that we could become one. So here's just a few of the things that was discussed. We had a gentleman there with the most advanced robotic arm, an amazing prosthesis. He was able to hold eggs, shake your hand, move his arm almost seamlessly the way we do ours. Yeah, there's some glitches, but it's a whole lot better than not having an arm. See, transhumanism does, or the technology behind it, isn't all bad per se, but now, because, if you're wearing glasses, you're enhancing your eyesight. If you're having an advanced prosthesis arm, this is a good thing. You're using it in a good way. But the worldview that goes behind it is something more. We can become more than human. So here's a question. Who's the human? This is not a good picture because you'll all point out quickly who the robot is and who the human is. Who here is the human? One is not like the other. The man standing is Dr. Ishiguro from Japan, who had created one of the most advanced robotic heads ahead of himself. And it was a remarkable piece of machinery. It has an advanced capability of learning and being able to take the environment around it and compute it, and then it has involuntary movements. A light switch is flicked on. It's where you're looking to see where the light came on, who's walking in. From a distance, you can't tell it's not a human. It's an amazing piece. During that week, I was helping a broadcast company do some interviews with transhumanists. And we were in a hotel right across the street from the Lincoln Center where this event was being held. And Dr. Ishiguro and his Geminoid, that's what he's called, was just down the hallway a little ways from us. And maybe about 4 or 5 doors down. And a person who was a hotel employee walked by me. And I was standing in the hotel waiting for one of the rooms to open up. And I said to that person, "Stop! Stop! You just walked by a robot." Well, how many people here would just kind of go, okay, the guy's cracked in the head. Who does this? Stop. You just walked by a robot. I pointed to the Geminoid and said, see, check out that man over there, the way he's sitting. That's not a human. That's a robot. Meanwhile, the guy in the chair, the Geminoid, is looking around and checking stuff out. He looks like a human. He acts like a human. And so the hotel attendee walked back slowly. And you don't just go up to somebody in a chair and just, "Are you a robot?" But he kind of just sauntered by, just checking him out. It didn't take long, and he had out of his pocket what? A smartphone, all wired and connected in. Click, 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 click. And he was giving me a thumbs up. This is amazing, dude. I thought it was a human. We have come a long, long way, folks. A long way. The technology is amazing. One of the reasons why this event took place in New York City is that the thrust was the United Nations needs to be the global entity to help bring about a standard or a model of how transhumanism will look. And so a letter was directed to the United Nations on behalf of the conference organizers, looking to see if we could get the United Nations to come up and step alongside and work with this. James Martin, the man in the middle, was one of the attendees of that particular conference. He was considered the fourth most powerful man in the history of the computer industry. He's worth an incredible amount of money. He was the largest benefactor to Oxford University in 900 years. These are not small peanuts people. I had a chance to spend some time with him. I did an interview with him. Walking back from our hotel to the Lincoln Center, had a great conversation with him. Originally a farm boy from England. We had a very interesting conversation. And he looked at transhumanism as his potential savior, as all the rest of them did, that this technology would save us from death, save us from decay, and we could all come together. What was so disappointing was 8 days later, I received an email saying Dr. James Martin has passed away. He didn't see his final utopian dream, that his technology would perfect himself. Souls are at stake. Worldviews and beliefs have consequences. What we've been talking about here today is just that. And the consequences of these worldviews, and this one in particular, one-ism, is incredible. So, was there God talk there? Lots and lots and lots of God talk. The opening presentation was a reflection of the spirituality of transhumanism. And we closed off by having an interfaith panel talking about the incredible direction we can go with transhumanism and how religion will look in a transhumanist world. And so there was a lot of talk that we can form a race of God-men and develop a godlike civilization. One of the conference speakers said, and he was a Hindu, he says, "You are the light. You are the truth. You are the beginning. You are the end." Well, I know where those words come from. You can't even be original with that. We somehow think we're going to redesign ourselves from scratch? No, we're not. This gets back to the Mormon side. My friend Lincoln Cannon, the president of the Mormon Association, Transhumanist Association, yes, he's my friend. We do not agree with each other. But he's been very hospitable to me. We've had some great interactions, and I find him to be very open and honest with his worldview. This is what he said in at his 2013 Mormon Transhumanist Association meeting. And again, this speaks to the heart of what transhumanism is all about. The Mormon Transhumanist Association stands for the proposition that we should learn to become gods. And not just any kind of God, not the God that would raise itself above others, but rather the God that would raise each other together. We should learn to become Christs, saviors for each other, consolers and healers, as exemplified and invited by Jesus. Lincoln says it all. Lincoln says it all. Yes, we disagree. In fact, we disagree so much, he brought me in to speak at the 2013 Mormon Transhumanist Association meeting. And if you want to take and look at the 15-minute video of my talk to the Mormon transhumanists, check out my webpage, forcingchange.org. And you can scroll down and you'll see the YouTube. I was given a 15-minute time period to give a Christian conservative criticism of religious transhumanism. That's a pretty big mouthful, isn't it? What are you going to say in 15 minutes? You can't even clear your throat in 15 minutes, let alone give a critique of this. So the bottom line was this in my presentation. It's not of works. It's not your technology that saves you. It's not your religion that saves you. It's not by ritual that saves you. And I gave the example of Jesus on the cross, taken out of Luke 23, I believe it is, where you see a thief on either side of Jesus. The one thief is calling down and chastising Christ. The other thief is saying, Don't you have any fear of God? This is an innocent man. And then that thief who had compassion turns to Jesus and says, remember me today in paradise. What did Jesus not tell the thief? Jesus did not say to the thief, you need to get down off the cross and find a technical solution to your problem of death. He didn't say, you have to go and join the priesthood. He didn't say, go down and do lots of good works and start social causes. He didn't say any of those things. Because there was nothing the thief could do. And that's the point. Nothing he could do except trust on the one who was dying on his behalf. Period. No technology, no rituals, no obligations, no temple rites, as in Mormonism. None of that saves you. None of that gives you a God status. Either you trust in Christ alone, which is an exclusivist, two-ist view, or you say, I'm going to do it myself, the one-ist view. What we have going on is a Tower of Babel syndrome of oneness. Technologically, politically, psychologically, digitally, you name it, we are now building it to assert our oneness. Look at what we can do. Look what we can become. So how are we to have a response to this? Because this is daunting. This is the dominant worldview, okay? This is the worldview that clashes against yours. First of all, number one, we need to recognize the historical continuation of man's sin desire. That we are wanting to be in charge of our own destiny. We want to build our own order. It's all about what I can do or what we can do. Frank Sinatra's famous song, I Did It My Way, is the global anthem of all times. He, in his song, says he will not bow his knee as one who prays. Instead, all the way through, he's going to proclaim, I did it my way. That's the song of Genesis 3. That's the song of the Tower of Babel. That's the song of my sinful human heart. Because if Carl Teichert is honest, I'm in the same boat. Without Christ, it's me trying to do it myself. So the first thing is just understand that what this is not a grand, vast conspiracy of shadow men and shadow players. Is there conspiracies within all this? Sure, there could be. Sure, there could be. But way more importantly, that this is the movement of history, just reflecting our sinful heart desire. Period. If we get that right, things come together pretty quickly. Ecclesiastes tells us this, there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which is said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. All we've talked about today is basically just a regurgitation of Babel. Second response, don't be a gullible participant. I hate to say this, but the Christian community, we have jumped on board in a major way, in many, many ways, through emergent spirituality, through our involvement in deep green and deep ecology movements, under the banner of world peace or social justice. The list goes on of how we want to fit in with the world. Our job is not to fit in with the world, but to give the truth of Jesus Christ. Period. Period. And do it in love and do it in truth. Help your neighbors, get involved, do things, sure, but never forget our core reason for being, and that is Jesus Christ. And so what we have going on is a church culture that is not just a gullible participant. Sometimes in the view that I've seen as I've rubbed shoulders in these meetings, we want to participate because the world accepts us when we say it's all one. Thirdly, guard your own heart, because as what we've just talked about here is being done collectively, I guarantee it, it's also happening here individually within our own hearts. So we need to guard against our own social pride. Look what I can do, look what we can do. We need to guard against the idea that it's going to be through our unity that we can save the world, we can save ourselves. I need to guard that in my own life. I need to guard against the pride of my own heart, because it's just simply a reflection of what I've just showed you here that we are doing collectively. And then finally, number 4, and this is the one that's pretty sobering, expect a clash. And expect this clash to intensify as the God is separate, two-ist worldview collides with we are all God, one-ist worldview. and as the byproducts of both sides come into conflict and into collision. And this is going to happen more and more and more. We saw it in Indiana just recently. We're going to be seeing it a lot more. We saw it with Trinity West University with the idea of having Christian lawyers in our country. Wow, what an uproar. What an uproar. So expect this. The words of Jesus become even more vivid when you think about it from this perspective. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Not a pleasant thought, but that's the reality of the situation that we as Christians find ourselves in. Our response to that is still to speak in truth and love. Even though the world comes against us, we still speak in truth and love. The early church did it. Christians throughout generations have done it. That is our goal. That is our task. Proverbs says this. Here's where we put our trust. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Shun evil. And finally, I appreciate what Francis Schaeffer wrote in his book, How Should We Then Live? It is my hope that this generation may turn from that greatest of wickedness, the placing of any created thing in the place of the Creator, and that this generation may get its feet out of the paths of death and may live. Thank you for being an attentive audience. If you want to know more about what we do, check out our webpage, forcingchange.org. You can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. All those great social media platforms can be found if you go to forcingchange.org. And if you want to check out our products and materials, I have CDs at my table dealing on issues such as transhumanism, global education, world order, Freemasonry. They're there for your use. Each CD contains PDF reports and MP3 files that will help you understand these movements in a far deeper way. I also have a DVD called Truth Challenge that takes a look at postmodernism and interfaithism. You want to check it out. And finally, I've said this to a few people at the table already, this is by far the most enjoyable book out there. Put together by a couple of friends of mine from Wisconsin. It's called Snowmanology, The Origin of the Species. A wonderful spoof on evolution through the evolution of the snowman. Adults will find this even more humorous than kids. Get a copy. It's fairly expensive, $15, but get a copy, stick one in your bathroom. I guarantee you, whoever's going to be sitting down next is going to be looking at this. It is cool. And it hits home hard. Again, thank you. Kevin, back to you.